Hey everybody, Chris here. Just a quick note on today's episode. It's a little bit different. This episode was recorded in Columbia, Maryland this past April during the final day of our Performance Climbing Coach Seminar. And this is a Q&A involving all of the great coaches and climbers who attended, talking to the coaches who were teaching the seminar, including Steve Bechtel and Charlie Manganiello from Climb Strong, Dr. Tyler Nelson from Camp 4 Human Performance, Neely Quinn from TrainingBeta, and Kelly Drager, who is a sport dietitian with the Canadian climbing and Olympic programs, as well as myself. Our next Performance Climbing Coach Seminar is happening October 10th through the 12th at the Minnesota Bouldering Project in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And these have sold out in the past, but I've got a $100 off code for you. It's Chris100. That's all caps, KRIS 100, the numbers 100. And you will find a link to register for that event right there on the show notes in your pocket supercomputer. So let's get on with it.
Maybe you don't know.
This time, power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
I have many questions. First off, just open for anybody. My name's Dawes Strickler. I'm from United States Military Academy. Training for speed climbing. Where would you place this in a phase? Drills, strategies? That's it.
I'll answer that, Steve Bechtel. I think speed climbing has a greater place in high performance climbing than the current crop of competition climbers want to believe. The young climbers, and you guys deal with these youth athletes, have almost no objection to speed, and they're actually quite interested in it. We've been dealing with the youth national teams this last year, and it's very, very easy for them to integrate in with their training. Speed training is interesting because it enhances their coordination, their ability to make decisions quickly, moving quickly between the holds, of course, right? But I think that's like a low intensity version of power training that those athletes can put to use in bouldering and on-sighting. And it's just another facet of the same thing. I understand it's a different version of our sport, and it's something that I'm not good at it, and I'm not really interested in becoming better at, but it doesn't make it any less entertaining to watch, and that's really what competition climbing is about. So as far as integrating it in, I would say put it near a power phase, and then I would take the time to let them do lots and lots of repeats of those things. Just practice those things. For most competition climbers, they're appropriate as a skill drill at the end of a warm-up. And then you can just feather away the amount of time those athletes are putting into it if you're focusing more on boulder or on lead. There's several good speed resources, but there's a Canadian guy named Patrick LaBelle, and he's a really great coach, and he also has good information, and I think if you reached out to him, he would be able to give you some specifics on what he does with the Canadian kids. But like I said, it's got its place, and it doesn't really take that much time away from a normal training schedule to put some speed climbing in to a level that you can become at least competitive. But again, we have some resistance to that with the older athletes at this point.
Yeah, and just to build on what Steve said, as far as practicing the skill of it, a lot of gyms only have the two halves. They don't have a full speed setup. So I really like to have some of my athletes who do it, who have that specific setup or who have a full setup, do just parts of it and do it at different speeds. So I might be looking for a half speed and then a full speed. And I think by slowing them down, a lot of research has shown that by slowing things down to a purposeful speed, then retention is a little bit better, and they're able to coordinate things better. So, and I wouldn't slow it down to sloth style like we worked on, but I would have them purposely try to hit a half speed mark, something like that.
Yeah, this kind of piggybacks off of what Dawes was saying, but in terms of the Olympic format, have you guys put any thought into prioritizing one thing over the other in the different respects and how they can have crossover to help each other for coaches that are looking to help people that have that goal of the Olympics?
Well, I guess, Chris, you want to answer?
I was gonna prompt Tyler. He looked like he wanted to
I think
talk
we'll
really
probably
badly.
default to what Steve generally emphasizes as strength is always the priority. And you'll notice that the athletes that are the highest boulders, they already probably have the highest peak power. So all the things that we're doing, we really, as long as your athlete is going through those phases and we're going through an adequate strength phase, all we need to do is include some ballistics and include lower extremity stuff. And those athletes, all they need to do is learn the actual route and the skill of speed climbing and start memorizing it. And they're really suited already for speed climbing. And the energy systems are already developed. It's just kind of like a whole different skill that they need to learn the speed climbing. But I think the stuff that we do already really helps the athletes emphasize the speed climbing. We just got to get really much better at that speed training, both for the upper and lower extremities, especially the lower extremity. We don't do that much.
And yeah, just to go a little more into what Patrick has been doing, there's a lot of single leg hops, a lot of hops upstairs, leg speed stuff. It's simply taking what these people can already do and then increasing the speed at which they can do it. And I think that bleeds really, really well into other forms of climbing. It's not taking away at all from your endurance, and it's not taking away at all from your ability to generate power on a hard boulder problem.
Yeah, and I think we've seen over and over again that the athletes who are the better boulders, the strong boulders, are able to cross over a little bit easier. Once an athlete has the skills to be able to lead climb, building the endurance is pretty easy. So I think bouldering is the focus. Bouldering and strength are the focus most of the time.
Yeah, and one thing that can be neglected in the weight room when we're doing our strength sessions is the unilateral strength. And so we see a lot of heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, heavy bench press, but very rarely are you on the same exact height foothold with both legs and jumping for a hold. It's a lot of one-legged stuff. So these one-legged squats, these one-legged movements, rack step-ups with weight, lunges, cross over tremendously into the climbing, and we can get them to do that and get strong without having to worry about fingers and skin and all those other conditions that we worry about with climbing.
Hey, my name is Viet. I have a problem. No. Yeah, when you were talking about the unilateral exercises, are you talking about lower body stuff generally, or are you talking about like
Both.
doing like maybe like a dumbbell snatch, like switching arms off?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So what Viet is saying is unilateral strength, right? We're talking about one limb. And so when we're doing bilateral movements, we can compensate on our stronger side. And so we've got like one-legged explosive stuff or one-legged strength, but one arm like kettlebell snatches, right? Like when you go to do a dyno, you're going up with one hand. So, putting a kettlebell through your legs, hip hinging and coming up overhead. And so that stuff is super transferable on over to this type of training. And I think Steve has a thing. So yeah, Tyler's going to talk on over that. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
Like in general, there's a really common concept in physiology called the strength deficit, the bilateral strength deficit. So training unilaterally is really helpful. Like I meant to include some of the photos in the manual, but all of the exercises, the isometric stuff that we included, you can also do those unilaterally. So when we're doing like a rear foot elevated split squat, you can do that same thing with an isometric, and it's all about training those joint angles. And especially for speed climbing, they don't really get very much into the high joint angles. They stay pretty large with the joint angles, but they're really, really explosive at those joint angles. So doing hops is something that track and field athletes have been doing forever, just like we watched with those Kenyan jumpers, right? Those guys are really, really explosive, and their techniques of training, they're really just emphasizing the elastic energy in the lower extremity. So doing unilateral hops is incredibly helpful. Doing unilateral pulls, all that stuff we can really transfer into the actual technical skill of sport climbing. And as long as we're training power output, we're emphasizing that ATP system, the ATP PC system, so we're really going to produce that power at an efficient rate.
With an eye towards, this is Brendan Killian, with an eye towards the upcoming Olympics, as far as the U.S. climbing culture and programming, what are we not doing that other countries are doing?
Winning.
Kelly,
Ask the Canadian.
I think this is yours, Kelly. Don't give up any secrets.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the systems, I kind of gave you a bit of a glimpse of what we do for our whole package at the elite level. Really looking at a feeder system, I'm not sure that's occurring here, or it's occurring to the extent that it could. Looking at the developmental level of your athletes and how that's functioning for the high level. There's a lot of profile athletes in the U.S. that are profiled individually and almost professional climbers, and how does that fit into your national program of developing a team concept that can motivate younger climbers to develop the same way or develop that approach? So, having a systematic approach from developing those athletes throughout the year to reach the level for the Olympics. We really do look at those high profile athletes, but where are they in the scheme of things from a developmental level? A lot of climbers, pro climbers, are self-taught, self-coached, self-supported, and throughout the programming from a nation, that support can be directed for programming, for sports science specialists, for training specialists to help collectively your programs. It's kind of how I looking at all the Instagrams and all those kind of things.
Yeah, and I think what Kelly's saying is really, really important. And when I was at the World Cup in Vail last year, the Japanese team had a massive support team around them, and no other athletes did really. Individual athletes might have a person or two, but there wasn't a big team support. And Japan was in 9 of the top 10 places at the end of qualifiers. So I think that whole system that they've built of having a team, funneling people in, supporting their athletes, I think is important.
I was just going to say, I was able to go to a conference up in Banff, and Kelly was there, and a lot of the Canadian teams came from all these different provinces, and I don't think we're missing anything. I just don't think we're collaborating. And so a lot of teams are doing their stuff kind of on their own. And people from Alberta and Saskatchewan and Ontario and Vancouver all coming to one spot to kind of see how seasons went, what went well, what didn't, and working together as a nation for the Olympics, right? Like, the U.S. team, not just the person on the team. And so I thought that I maybe that's going on. It doesn't seem like it is maybe here in the United States, but where that could be missed.
Chris, could I just speak to that? Recently this summer, I went to the Coaches Accelerate program that the Olympics held for a select few coaches that were regional champions in the country. So this is one of the things that I would really like to see more of, is the teams in the region organizing together, because that's kind of the first step of all of this to build a stronger country for the athletes that are moving into it, is separate coaches not trying to build their separate teams in isolation of all the other coaches, but the coaches working together. There's actually a coach that I'm working with at Climb Nashville for this regional championship for our region, that we're going to have a big coaches dinner the night before, and we're all going to hang out and share ideas. There's a coach in the Northwest, Drew White, I'm probably going to butcher the name of this team. It's Monmouth Athletic Club. But he gave me this idea, and he was like, we always just have dinner and hang out. And I think that's one of the first steps to building these kinds of relationships. Go regionally, then divisionals, and then we'll have a stronger overall U.S. team.
Yeah, and in the conversations I've had with Connie Leitner, who I know you're friends with as well, she was always looking for ways to get Kai involved with more coaching, more route setting, integrating into other teams and working with them, simply for that sake, for the idea of kind of unifying everything and everyone getting to know each other. So I think it's really important.
I just wanted to add one little thing. When we were in Norway and climbing alongside Adam Ondra this last summer, he travels with his physiotherapist, who also doubles sort of as his movement coach. And even on an individual level, I think that I've never seen an American climber traveling with a physio. And every time he'd fall off his project, his physio was there to help him or fix him when he got broken. So I think that it's a mindset thing too, and where we allocate our sponsorship money. Not we, but the pros.
Yep, for sure. Anybody else? Where are we at here? Oh, right behind me.
Olympics or something else? Okay. So first, what would an integrated resistance training look like during a power endurance phase? For Steve, would you do one at all, or
like an integrated program in a power phase?
We talk about power and strength, but we didn't talk about
power endurance. Yeah. First, I would say the power endurance phase will be relatively short, but I would say that about half of your climbing time would be dedicated to enhancing or training your power endurance, and then I would also have a phase that we're still maintaining strength and power, or a session or two per week. And so if we had, so if we did a session of integrated strength. Then a power endurance session of integrated power or bouldering style session, and then back to the power endurance. And so in a sequence of 4 workouts, it'd be like strength, energy system work, power, energy system work, and the strength. Like I said, we can meld strength and power very effectively into the same session. The recovery from those is very similar. Okay. And so you could have, box jumps and squats in the same session. And then within the power endurance, I used to be interested in doing high repetition, total body things. I don't think that's wrong to do like kettlebell conditioning circuits, things like that, but I don't think it's the most appropriate because most of the failure endurance-wise is very local, muscular in the forearm. We don't have a lot of systemic endurance failure in climbing. Very rarely, like Charlie was saying, do your legs give out because of how pumped you are. So I would keep those power endurance or strength endurance sessions to fairly sport-specific modes, aiming at forearm system, for our local muscular endurance there.
And to go back of my first question, what are your thoughts about 2 sessions a day? What would you manage that?
So 2 sessions a day is not about doing more. It's about splitting up the workload, right? And so it's not like, how can I fit more in? It's how can I do what I'm doing now, but still do it fresh, right? And so a lot of people get it wrong, and they're like, I'm going to add more stuff to this. I'm going to do a little bit more stuff. What you really need to do is take your 1 session a day, and you're like, you know what? I'm just not fitting this all into one 90-minute session. And so now I'm going to do a 60-minute session AM, 60-minute session PM, and then start to grow both of those things. But the less intense stuff should be on the end of the day. Your skill work should be at the beginning of the first workout. Okay. And then we work through our energy systems, really the way we should work through it is our skills. The high skill, high coordination stuff needs to be early on. At the end of the day, you can do things that you've got really well dialed. Resistance training at the end of the day is not wrong. Hangboarding at the end of the session is not wrong. Even though you read a book and you're like, oh, we should strength train early in the workout. there's very little coordination going on in hangboarding, and there's very little chance that you're going to somehow magically overdo it hangboarding because you're tired from bouldering.
So, for example, if I'm doing a day of strength training, so I'm gonna do the strength on the limit bouldering in the morning, and after that I can do a resistance training or integrated strength at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I might have mentioned in a conversation with you earlier, I have an athlete that's climbing at a very high level, but still wanting to keep strength and power. And so he will go climbing for the day and then drive down from the crag. Everyone else goes to the bar. He goes to the gym.
Okay.
And does hangboard, heavy resistance training right after a hard climbing day so that he can optimize recovery for the next climbing day. He climbs 2 days 1 week, 3 days the next week, and follows those sessions right away. So he's really only training on Monday, and he takes 2 days off, trains on Thursday, takes 2 days off, trains on Sunday, and then so he's like basically 1 day on, 2 days off, but he has a double session each of those days to optimize recovery. And the real answer is, or the real question for that athlete is it necessary, and am I recovering? If I'm getting better, I'm doing a good job. If I'm not, 2 workouts a day might be wasting your time.
Yeah.
Might want to talk to your kids instead or something. So.
Anybody else out here?
I guess just for the group. This is Stu Wong. Where do you see climbing coaching as a profession going in terms of gathering a background of either nutritional, physical, medical certification or education prior to having to function with either youth or adults? How do you see it interacting with personal training certifications or other things?
You got something, Chris? Oh, so if I understood the question, just what kind of background do you think we should have as the standard for climbing coaches, more or less?
And where is it going in the future?
Next five, yeah, that's kind of why we got excited about starting this conference, because you guys have such good potential to help so many potentially really good athletes and just athletes that want better lifestyles and be really good at exercise, that parents are into rock climbing. So there's a real influence that you have, but up until now, it's the only qualification that you need to have is you need to be a climber and you need to know a climbing gym, and then you become a coach, right? And so even in Salt Lake, our climbing coaches are great coaches, but they don't have a background in exercise science. So the whole goal with this seminar is to educate people so we can create some sort of baseline for climbing coaches around the country. And the question about the Olympics is collectively, this is just going to make the standard up higher. It's going to bring everyone collectively up to a new level of understanding, and for us to push climbing and for us to challenge what we do right now. Because what we do right now for training has worked up till now, but we have to keep pushing it, right? We have to keep progressing and challenging those norms. So in my opinion, I guess I went to a lot of school, but I think the education is really helpful. I think physical training is really helpful. I think doing a certification and creating that baseline for climbing coaches should happen within the next 5 years. There's no way in a normal like exercise gym that you'd be able to go in and take a client and run them through a series of exercises without that certification. That's kind of the standard in everywhere else. You know, high school coaches generally have some sort of background to take on an athletic team in a high school setting. So I think that's where we're going to go.
Yeah, I think it's going to get more and more delineated as it goes on. There's always going to be grassroots coaches who are just helping their friends out or whatever. But up until just the last couple of years, there's really only been random adult coaches and youth coaches. That was it. There really wasn't much of anything. So it's grown quite a bit in the last few years, and I think it's just going to continue and get more delineated. And you'll see a certification pop up before long, I imagine.
I might just comment from our perspective. In Canada, we do require the coaches to have certain certification across the sports. And I don't know if there's something similar here. In Canada, it's called NCCP. And there's level 1 to 5, and a national coach going to the Olympics has to be at a 5 for a lot of the sports, and even allowed to have accreditation to get into the Olympic venue or even coach at that level. So I'm not sure if other sports in the U.S. have those. I'm actually pretty positive they do, and that might be something to model climbing off of what's the baseline coaching requirements that have youth, right? So everybody has a certain standard, and right now we are developing it specifically for climbing. So again, it's something for a collective and collaboration within the coaches to look at how you want climbing coaching to progress in your country and elevate everybody's level higher, and the standards within the gyms, and who's coaching who, and ensuring that the developmental ages get what they need from health and performance, and then how does that work at the highest level. So we do have those levels, and I don't know if there's any other coaching kind of global programs that are offered in US, or if there's like the modules that look at the coaching piece.
How are your climbing coaches being trained?
So we have Alpine Club of Canada, so it'd be similar to in the States, the comparable with yours, and then ACMG for outdoor. So there's certain levels of coaching for climbing, and then the modules are Sport Canada derived. So those are a nationwide programming. And so with all the other sports that I work with, like wrestling, Nordic, all the different sports, the coaches go through those modules. And at the institutes, we have a coaching program director who organizes certain modules that are effective. So learning about the female athlete triad. So if a coach doesn't know about that, we might put on a nationwide webinar, or they'll fly us in to do a session for those coaches. So it's creating some type of curriculum almost for your coaches, and maybe being a curriculum that's specific for climbing that you guys want to see as a collective to bring up the caliber of your coaches across the country. There's a lot of talent in this room. I think, like, just thinking about who everybody in this room, and spending the weekend with you guys, that there's so many great ideas and so much knowledge from different areas, and you've got some amazing people up here. But the coaching element, you guys are kind of the quarterback for organizing, the yearly training plan of those athletes, and bringing in the resources to help your team, help those individuals. So getting some expertise in like YTP planning and the stuff that, the strength and conditioning is huge, and looking at who you're using for paramedical, who's your nutrition specialist. Those things take expertise in planning too, and communication, and how that flow looks.
I think developing your education is really important, because certification, like, how many training certifications do you have, Chris?
I've got none.
He's got none. Does anybody doubt that he's an awesome coach? Right? Like, he's done his work. He's studied, and you sit down and talk to him for a half hour, and you're like, whoa, I'm gonna open up my checkbook, right? And that's what you need to be able to do, because the certifications are, we could all go online and by the end of this discussion, we could all have a new personal training certification, right? There are a wide variety of certifications out there, but really, I found many of the certifications I've been through were less difficult than getting CPR certified. And that tells me nothing. Like, it's a number and a name, and some letters behind your name. And so what you always want to do is continue to educate yourself. And I know there's a lot of coaches in here that have got certifications of varying degrees, but one of the things that happens, and I'm sure that you coaches will agree with me, is you get done with the certification and you're like, what did I really get out of that? And some of them, it's a big goose egg, and it's something you had to do for work. And some of them are fabulous, but we don't have that yet in climbing. Like a certification that also makes you feel like you got the education. Because I went through and I got my first personal training certification. I was like, oh crap, I'm a certified trainer now, and I still don't know what to do. Like, I know, how the, muscle physiology works, and I know how this works and that and all these pieces, but until you put it together, and until you continue to connect the dots with all the books that you read, and, you were recommended probably close to 25 books this weekend. And once you're done with all of those this month, you got to go to another 25 and you go to another seminar, and then you get on email with each other. And that's how we become these better coaches, because nobody's going to do it for you. If you think that our climbing governing body is all of a sudden going to get great at coaching education, it's not going to happen. Like, you guys are the ones that are going to make that happen, or we are, the group in this room. And so that's the thing, is like, get educated, and there's no amount of certification is gonna supersede what you learn on your own and create for yourself.
Caleb Stripes. This is for Tyler. That first lecture you gave on Friday about muscle physiology, I thought was great and very fascinating. But the information also went really fast, and I don't feel that I had a base knowledge to really get as much out of that as I wanted. So, do you have a book you can recommend where I can dive into that deeper and at my own pace and kind of like really absorb it?
Oh yeah, there's lots of good books. There's a decent amount of that material in the manual. Like, there's an exercise physiology section that goes through the energy systems, that goes through the muscle fiber types, that goes through the twitch types, goes through the characteristics of a twitch response. So that's like a good place to start to get the absolute basics. And then tons of books out there on, exercise physiology that would probably bore the tears out of you unless you're way into that kind of stuff. So that's probably a really good place to start. If you're looking for rock climbing specific stuff, I think the Anderson Brothers book does a pretty good job at like explaining the energy systems for rock climbing. And then they have some good pictures as well. So those are two good places to start. And yeah, that stuff is complicated to address, because that's one of the things that I have trouble with this presentation, is there's such a wide range of knowledge in here. So it's kind of, how do we cater it to everyone's needs? So this time I tried to cut it as short as we could and fit as much as we can in that short period of time. So sorry if that I do talk fast.
Yeah, we know that Tyler is the smartest guy in the room, and he talks really fast, so we put a lot of it in the manual.
Taylor Reed. A lot of my the workouts, I guess I'm not sure I really call it programming, but a lot of the workouts I end up recommending are pretty much every day. They're highly skill based, and I'm kind of curious about the comments Steve made, but I'd love to get anybody else's opinion regarding many of these can be essentially very low impact, but then a number of them can go into more of the power/strength area. But then on top of that, you're looking at, say, throwing in actual training of some sort in using another energy system. And so there was a comment you made the other day regarding, I can't remember if it was Friday or yesterday, regarding energy systems and trying to maintain one on a given day, but it's okay to go into a second one, but as long as that second one is a little bit less. Can you speak a little bit more about that and about how to approach that?
Right. So we all understand that skills degrade under fatigue, and acquisition of skills degrade under fatigue. You've tried to study right before bed, and it doesn't work very well, right? We don't pay really close attention, and that's why we don't do one more lecture after dinner, on these weekends, right? Because you guys are going to come in and be drinking beer and be like, I didn't understand a thing.
And it's why we let Tyler go first.
Yeah, exactly. But so when we're training those skills, and especially if it's a strength involved skill, like go-agains or something like that, you're taxing those muscles as well as the skill ability of the body. I would say you want to separate out the skills as much as you need to in order to have fresh, a really good go each time. And if you think of like field sports like hammer throw and discus and things like that, very often it's 5 to 6 minutes between throws. And so those taxing skills we need to separate out and consider those like part of your strength and power stuff. And then on the same day as that, if you were going to do it, I would do something that's the opposite side of that, and go like, okay, I know this athlete still needs to work on strength endurance and things like that, but then we start worrying about their ability to recover. And so I would say, let's go into some easy footwork drills. Like we can go put them on the auto belay and work on high stepping for 15 to 20 minutes on a 5-6. Take them way to the other end of the spectrum, or go into something like working mobility, working a flexibility issue, working on something that athlete very much needs, but isn't being addressed in that same skill session. Does that answer your question at all?
It does to an extent, but so the problem is that if I do skill work every day, then that would essentially mean I would have to have some skill days that didn't go into a strength or a power oriented session, and so that I could program power endurance or endurance on that particular day, as opposed to being able to run say harder skills most days, but then also be able to hit those other energy systems. And so I've experimented in the past with, for example, requiring say like a 2 a day, where earliest skill, sort of like the what you had with the young lady on there, early skill, later another energy system, but then also occasionally I basically just say, I just want you to take an hour of downtime, or something along those lines. But so I guess what I'm really looking for is sort of a recommendation. Is that if it's not optimal, do you still recommend it? If you don't recommend it, well, how would you approach the same problem?
You might just vary the volume of the skill work you do. The warm-ups that Chris prescribed the other day, like the contrast drill, the sloth monkey. You could say we're going to do that in the warm-up, and then we're going to move on to the energy system training that we're doing, and we're not going to have any more specific skill work that day. And then another day you might say we're going to spend the first 45 minutes doing skills, and then just a very, very small amount of like say hangboarding or something. And so you might just think about varying the volume of it, and understanding that if you're developing the skill regularly over the course of an entire training plan, 4 to 6 weeks, whatever it is, that athlete is going to acquire skill more on repetition than on volume in an individual session. And so you can always go like, okay, we're done here. This is too much. But it does take more of the coaching art than just like saying it's going to be 15 minutes this day, 30 minutes this day. And Chris will have a good answer for this too.
I'm glad you said coaching art. Actually, I think this is really a big part of that, and something that I think is important that you can add in or make a change to is when you're working on really high level skills that are fairly high intensity, and that becomes a problem with programming any hard workouts. There are a lot of ways, and you're a creative guy and can come up with ways to regress those really intense skills and work on the core components of them, instead of taking that, it doesn't have to be done on a V10. You could find a way to work the core component of that skill at a lower level, and like Steve said, vary the volume, vary the intensity. And I think that's a good way to mix it all together. Anybody else out here?
Dawes Strickler. Just wondering if anybody would have any recommendations or advice for military climbing athletes to balance their physical tests that they are expected to perform in with high performance climbing training competition.
What are the physical tests that we map those out for us?
So standard for the Army is the Army Physical Fitness Test. It's 2 minutes push-ups, 2 minutes sit-ups, 2-mile run. There's additional military tests for occupation where they could be placed. Deadlift, beep test, medicine ball throw, long jump. And then there are specific special schools that an officer could go into, a ranger, a SEAL. The qualifications for those are somewhat rigorous
So your initial question was, how would we take an athlete to prepare them for those tests, or how would they work that into a climbing program while they're training for those simultaneously?
Correct.
The second part of the question. Got a good answer for that?
Yeah, sure. And so that's the really cool thing is that they're required to have a foundation of strength, right? We have so many people that Charlie talked about one of his athletes that is fundamentally has no structure. It's like if you build a one-story building, it can be made of straw, right? But if you're going to build a skyscraper, you need to have a gigantic foundation and steel structure inside it. And so, like the Army has this ability of or this desire to have a base physical ability from all their athletes. And so, I would say on top of these basic abilities that they're trying to build, once they get to those levels, is when you need to actually back your athletes off and say, okay, look, you're good enough to do the 2-minute push-up test. You're solid on the 2-mile run. Let's defocus that as long as we can still maintain it, and then we're going to start bringing up our sport-specific stuff. Foundation first, then build the sport-specific stuff on top of it. And then I would continue to test those athletes once a month. How often do you test the physical fitness stuff?
The APFT is twice a year, every 6 months. Special schools once a year, depending on when they have the tryouts. At Marines, Air Force, somewhat different lengths of running or pull-up. The Marines have pull-ups, and then push-ups are pretty constant. Sit-ups are.
Yeah, I would test them twice as often, maybe once every 3 months, and just so they understand that they've still got those skills, right? And it's like with my athletes, if they still have the endurance to do their landmark route at the crag, and then I'm like, okay, don't worry about that. You've got the endurance. Let's continue to focus on your finger strength and power. If we have somebody that's just got stacks of physical ability, we talked about Brad's upper body strength. He was pressing, and like if he can go into the gym, still press that 80-pound kettlebell overhead, then let's not really worry about pushing that number much higher. And I would do that with your athletes, and then get them, don't forget to tell them that the sport-specific stuff of climbing is really going to cross over to this other stuff. Because climbers in general come in pretty darn strong, the ones that haven't done any other kind of training, especially in, our sport movements, pulling and tension.
Yeah, that general strength base will last a lot. A couple week cycle even before the test would be adequate enough to get them prepared for the test. I can't imagine they'd have any decrement in passing that exam if they've done it before and they just have to keep doing it and just program around it. Maybe, taper off the climbing specifics 3 weeks before and then ramp up their, testing specific skills and energy systems, and they'll have no problem.
Yeah, I think if it's the test that they're worried about, that they have to pass this test to reach a certain level of whatever, I think we can look at almost any of the pro sports, like the NFL Combine. There are companies that you can pay just to perform well at the Combine. It's not necessarily a reflection of your skill on the field, but that's how it's viewed. So you can cheat the test essentially by doing pretty much exactly what Tyler said. And they're still going to be plenty strong. We got 5 more minutes. Questions?
All right. My name's Joe. When talking about assessments, like when you're assessing your athletes once a month, so when you're doing that, like in a gym environment, it's very hard to assess saying like, all right, well, this kid did a harder grade because the grades are so subjective. So is there something more quantifiable that you can assess other than like, okay, well, this kid can hang on longer? Like, I think assessment's really tricky when it comes to climbing. And I guess my question is, how do you know if what you're doing is truly working?
Right. Yeah. Or the accuracy. Well, I would guess test accuracy. Yeah, that's a good question. And in general, you could look at trends in that athlete's performance if we're looking right at the grades. But yeah, I'm like, you go to the right gym and your V grades go way up because they grade them differently. But we can do things that are like Tyler said, we can do things that, like, if they have a higher vertical jump, we know that the power is improving, right? If they have ability, we'll do duration hangs on a 20 millimeter edge or maximum hangs on a 20 millimeter edge, and then predict from there if their finger strength has improved. Like a 10-second hang, single second hanging, or one RM hanging is not a good idea. But yeah, 10-second hang, are they getting better? And we look at those numbers, and those are the pieces. And then performance is always, you've always got to be working those skills. But I would say coming up with some kind of combine type thing, like, let's see, if you're looking at capacity, total V grades in 40 minutes would be a good test for a group of kids, because it's interesting and fun. You could also look over time, just look at their logs and have them log on-sites. On-sites usually, your on-site ability usually follows your red point ability on bouldering. And so if you're all of a sudden able to on-site V12, or excuse me, red point or send V12, your on-sites are also going to be coming up. Like if maybe your on-site is V9 and it keeps scooting up. And so if you have a good logging, you should be able to see those trends going up. And because projecting is always really hard to test, limit bouldering, like how do we quantify what happened in a limit bouldering session? And so I think coming up with a few really carefully designed tests for that would be good. And Tyler will be able to speak to this a little more than I can.
Yeah, I do the exact same thing for our athletes locally. I test them every 3 weeks. And they'll come and they'll do max finger vertical pull, max bar vertical pull, low pin pull, and then a mid-thigh pin pull isometric, just as a measure. And it really keeps them motivated, because even in a 3-week period, neurologically, you'll adapt in 3 sessions, and you'll see your numbers go up. And that's really helpful for a coach to justify why their athlete's paying them. And then you can also look at the log. I think looking at the log is genius. And then you'll probably notice things that they won't, right? People are always going to look for the bad things about how they're performing and how they're functioning. Whereas a coach, it's your job to point out the things that are really, that they're being successful at and they're learning and they're growing at. But the testing, I think, and that's why it's so important to set that baseline. Because if you don't set the baseline, you have no idea. And it's too hard to track performance. I can barely remember what we had 2 nights ago for dinner, right? Athletes can't really remember things that they did in the past and how successful they were unless they keep track of it and unless we know where their baseline started. So yeah, I think the testing is really important. I'm going to try and expand for this next manual the testing section, and maybe come up with some sort of ebook where we can, I can really narrow down all these ideas so I don't have to speak twice as fast next time.
Yeah, and assessments are something we've struggled with for sure. Just trying to find the efficacy of them, exactly for the reason you described, because V grades are all over the place. And just specifically for the endurance side of things, be it more like aerobic power type endurance or the long-term local endurance, we really like the campus board just because it's more standardized and using feet. I know Tyler does something similar. I know Steve has as well. Just laddering on a standard campus board with your feet on is a really great way to get a solid number that you can then retest on the same campus board months later. Or if they're online client or remote somewhere, it's a pretty standardized setup. So I think that's a good tool to use.
I was just gonna say, and to piggyback off of Steve, I work with a ton of youth climbers, and it's hard to get away from the grades because that's what they're always looking at. It's staring them in the face. And I think it's a conversation that happens early in the season, reminding the athletes that just because you can climb one V5 or you climbed a V5 in the gym doesn't make you a V5 climber. And so if that athlete, or I have youth climbers who have climbed a V5 and can't climb all the V3s in the gym, we're obviously seeing that maybe that problem was maybe their style, or it was soft or whatever. And so trying to get them to think about being stronger in those kind of mid-range, or 2-3 grades below that max, seeing that number go up, like the average V grade in like their density circuits or something like that, can show that improvement as well. And I haven't really come up with a good system on it, but have them know what styles they're good at or what holds they're good at. And, say they climbed a V7 or a V5 or whatever that was a hold type that they weren't really good at, or a wall angle that they know they're not very good at. You can see improvement that way as well. I know it's super hard, and it's hard to get the kids to not chase those numbers. But yeah, I've seen it with my youth climbers, like having them send the V4 or the V3 that is on a wall angle that's really hard for them. In some ways, you can see it in their face, is actually even cooler than climbing the V6 or V7. Not always. Yeah.
I like how you're saying about, getting a general idea of the problems as a whole. One of the things our group looked at as far as an assessment tool, we were thinking of the one example you gave where the one climber wanted to integrate the moon board. It's something standardized. They can continue to go back to the same problems, and they can track their assessment on that if your gym has that tool. So it's kind of...
Yeah, I think those standardized walls and spray walls in general that you can come back to over time are a really great tool to have. And you're right, it's great as an assessment tool. So, Neely?
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Like at Cats in Boulder, it's a spray wall, and those problems have been up for years.
Yeah, totally. Okay, I think that is all the time we've got. So thank you guys a ton for all the great questions and for letting me stick microphones in your faces and put you on the internet. We really appreciate it.
Coaches, thanks. Don't drop it. It's expensive.
All right. Like I mentioned before, our next Performance Climbing Coach Seminar happens October 10th through the 12th at Minneapolis Bouldering Project in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Hopefully, I see a bunch of you out there. You can register at the link, either in the show notes on the blog page or right there on the show notes in your pocket supercomputer. And like I said, I've got a $100 off code for you. It's Chris100. That's capital K, capital R, capital I, capital S, and the numbers 100. Use that code, save yourself some money so that you can buy me a beer when you're there. All right, see you guys there. In the meantime, you know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com. You can find us on the Instagrams, on the Facebooks, and the Pinterests at Power Company Climbing. And you can look for us all day on the Twitters. You will not find us there because we don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time